Welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast. Just so you know, I have another podcast called the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast, where we talk about lifestyle design for men. And if you want to subscribe to that podcast, you can go to alphamale20.com and click podcast, and you can subscribe to it over there. We're on all of the usual podcast platforms. Latin America versus Asia. Get a lot of questions about this. And most guys, not most guys, a lot of guys in the Sovereign CEO audience have kind of already made up their minds in terms of where they want to move to or where they want to set up flags. They kind of know, if not their favorite country, their favorite regions. And so a lot of guys will say, oh, Asia for me. Oh my God, yeah. And a lot of guys say, oh, hell no, Latin America for me. But a lot of guys are kind of confused about this and are really not sure where to go. So if you've already made the decision to leave your authoritarian, high-tax, socialist, collapsing, totally insane Western country, United States, Canada, Europe, congratulations, by the way, but you don't exactly know where to go, I'm going to try to help you with this podcast. And I have no specific agenda or outline for this podcast. I have no specific bias toward either Asia or Latin America. You know why? Because I love both. Historically in my life, I have loved Asia. I have really related to many aspects of the Asian culture. My favorite city in the entire world up until maybe a year or two ago is or was Hong Kong. There's a magic to Hong Kong that I don't feel in any other city I've ever visited. And I have visited bazillion cities all over the planet Earth, many, many countries. I've been traveling for a very long time. I love going to China. I can't go to China right now because I don't have a jab, but I love certain cities in China. It's wonderful. Japan is amazing. I don't like it as much as China, but I really like Japan a lot. Most of the places I've been to in Asia, Singapore is fantastic. I almost moved to Singapore at one point. Most of the places I've been to in Asia, I have loved beyond belief. And there's a lot I appreciate about the industriousness of the Asian people, the organizational skills of the Asian people, the way they take their infrastructure seriously, which the West doesn't and hasn't for decades. There's a lot to like about the Asian culture. Do I like everything about Asian culture? No. It's highly collectivist, and I am the opposite of that. I am almost an individualism absolutist, almost, not quite, but close. I'm a minarchist libertarian, and so the last thing I like is collectivism. So there's aspects of the Asian culture I also don't like. But I love the Asian culture. It's fantastic. And so I have a very deep, almost spiritual connection to the Far East. Love it to death. And you know what? As I'm talking here, I'm starting to get a little sad. I haven't been to Hong Kong since cerveza sickness began. So it's been several years since I've been there. I used to go there all the time. And I am still kind of wrestling with how can I get back out to Hong Kong without getting a jab. I'm waiting for them to calm down, but Hong Kong is owned by China, and if you know what's happening in China right now, they may never calm down about this. So kind of strange, kind of weird, a weird scenario to be in. But anyway, that being said, in the last several years in my life, particularly I would say the last 5 or 6 years, I have also grown very fond of and deeply connected to Latin America. And so about, 6 years ago, I went on a big Latin American tour. I just picked several cities in several different countries, traveled for about a month, hit all these different places, fell in love with certain places, didn't like some places, and I've been back to Latin America many, many times. As many of you already know, Paraguay is basically my second home. I'm back there all the time. It's probably my favorite place in Latin America. I love Colombia, although I know Colombia is having trouble right now. I did a video about that. I love Panama, although they're having troubles right now. There will be a video about that soon. But basically, I love the spirit of Latin American people. And it is radically different than the Asian people. I mean, you can't get more diametrically opposite in terms of Asian people and Latin American people. Latin American people fall into two categories: the very relaxed, cool Latin American people like Paraguay, maybe Chile, and the crazy Latin American people, which would be like the Argentinians, the Brazilians, and people like that. Now, you may argue that Brazil is a Latin country. That's debatable. I'll call it a Latin country for the purposes of this podcast. So it's very different. The Latin people are very emotional. They're very passionate. They're quite disorganized. You get the feeling that sometimes they don't care. So here's what I've talked about in the past, is that you go to places like Brazil and Argentina, it's just craziness in these countries. It's just a madhouse. But you get the feeling they don't care. You get the feeling in these countries, Brazil and Argentina in particular, that they really don't give a shit. And it's kind of how they like it. They kind of like being crazy. They kind of like jumping up and down and going up and down and having a great prosperous economy and then crashing their currency and then having a great prosperous economy and then having a military coup and then and going up and down and up and down and up and down, which is what Argentina certainly has done. Brazil has done. And you get the feeling they kind of like it. Whereas there's other countries like Colombia, and I know, again, right this second, Colombia is going through some shit. I'm talking about over the last, 10, 15 years or so of Colombia. Whenever I've been to Colombia, there are problems there, and there are infrastructural problems and the usual weirdness of Latin America. But you get the feeling, unlike the Argentinians and the Brazilians, that they don't like these problems. And their attitude is, hey, we understand these are problems, but we're fixing it. We're working on this. We want to improve. We want to be better. And that's the beauty of Colombia that I like. I won't even talk about Venezuela, land of chaos right now, I understand. Then you have people in Paraguay who are the relaxed Latin people. They don't honk at each other quite as much as like Mexicans do. They don't scream at each other quite as much as other Latin cultures. They're a little more chill, a little more relaxed. They certainly look different. They're very white-skinned. They're as white as me down there, most of them anyway, just like the Argentinians. And so there's lots of different aspects to the Latin culture that are very diverse, yet they all have things in common. Very similar to the Asians in that respect. But in the Asians, let's go back over to Asia for a minute, there are radical differences between Asian countries, and you should be aware of this if you're new, if you've never traveled internationally. Americans in particular are horrible about saying things like all Asians look the same and all Asians are the same. I regularly get questions, especially in my Alpha Male 2.0 content, about, hey, are Asian women who live in Asia, are they easier to date? Or, hey, if I'm dating a woman, an Asian woman living in Asia, what about this and this and this? How would you suggest I handle this? Or sovereign CEO questions. Hey, if I wanted to move to Asia to set up a business, do you recommend that? Here's the problem. Saying Asian women who live in Asia is like saying European women who live in Europe. There are radical differences between women who live in Sweden versus women who live in the UK versus women who live in Italy, right? Radical, they can't even compare, versus women who live in the Ukraine, right? Radical differences. Asia's the same. I mean, hell, go spend a week in Japan and you will see the Japanese. And basically they all look like this. They all have straight faces, right? They're all dressed in their little suits. And you'll see mobs of Japanese people who just walk down the sidewalk as a giant mob, and it's silent. They're not talking. It's amazing. You get on the super crowded Japanese subway and it's silent. It's silent. It's just, you've never seen anything like this before as a Westerner. Then you hop on a plane, you fly for an hour and a half to Shanghai, China. It's completely different. Not only do they look completely different, okay, so Japanese women are amazingly beautiful. Chinese women they're not ugly. They're not ugly, okay? They're just not hot. It's a whole different thing over there. And you get over to China and it's noisy and loud and they're screaming and laughing and they're spitting. They all spitting on the sidewalk. And you go on a Chinese subway and it's just nonstop yelling and laughing and screaming and little kids wrestling around the floor. It's a whole different thing. You can't compare the Chinese to the Japanese. And then if you go down to Southeast Asia, you have radical differences down there. Much more sexual, much more carefree. Then you go up to Korea and you have the most emotional Asians you've ever seen in your life. They're like Italians. I mean, they're diametric opposites, the Koreans from the Japanese, who have basically robots, right? And the Koreans are screaming and yelling and getting into fist fights and slapping each other and laughing. And it's just hilarious to see these differences. So please, if you're new at this stuff, don't think for a minute you can say Asian. Asian doesn't mean anything. Which country are you talking about? It's radically different. Starting a business or investing in real estate in Cambodia is going to be radically different than doing this in Seoul, Korea. South Korea, by the way. There's no comparison. Trying to date women in Taiwan is a completely different experience than dating women in Thailand. It's like night and day, and it's another completely different experience if you go down to the Philippines. Talk about opposites. You should do that. For you guys interested, you single guys interested in dating and stuff, go spend a week in Taiwan and do some day game. Try to get laid in Taiwan. Then go to the Philippines. You will talk about a difference. Oh my God. So that's my point. Realize that both in Asia and Latin America, there's radical differences between these countries, different regions. You can't just visit one country in Asia and say, okay, I know Asia now. Because I've seen people, Americans in particular, who are guilty of this. Just like you can't visit Mexico and say, I visited the Latin world. No, I visited South America because I spent 3 or 4 days in Colombia. because I spent 3 or 4 days in Medellin or whatever. No, you have to actually do your research, on the ground research like I did, travel around a little bit and pick your favorite countries. When I talk about how much I love, guys assume that they should go to Paraguay too. No, you may hate Paraguay. Paraguay is kind of boring. If you're a young guy who likes to party and shit and go to bars and clubs and pick up chicks, and Paraguay's not where you want to go. You want to go to Rio. You want to go to Buenos Aires. You want to go to places like that. You want to go to Medellin. You don't want to go to fucking Paraguay, right? Now, if you're an older guy like me and you like it nice and quiet, Paraguay might be great. Depends you want. It'll be a little boring though. Don't expect a lot of amazing things going on in Paraguay. Even people who live in Paraguay will say, oh my, it's so boring here. You have to go to Argentina to do anything fun. Kind of accurate. When I say I like Paraguay, it's because I like it. You might hate it. So this is something interesting, is I don't think I've talked about this before. Maybe I did in my blogs years ago. Well, on my initial first visits to Latin America, one of the reasons I was going down there was I was seriously considering moving to Argentina. This is before I made the decision to move to Paraguay. This is many years ago. I was still trying to figure out where to move to. And I was strongly considering moving to Buenos Aires, or maybe a little outside Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I'd never been there yet, so I went down there to spend a week down there to see if I liked it. And while I was down there for a week, I also spent a week in Paraguay, because I said, okay, I might as well visit this little know-nothing boring country that I probably won't even like. I'll spend a week there. And then I spent a week in, Colombia, and I spent another week somewhere else, I forget. Anyway, my excitement for that trip was going to Argentina. I was super pumped to go to Buenos Aires. I was super excited. I said, this is probably gonna be my new home. I can't wait to visit the city and fall in love with it. It's gonna be great. Argentina's gonna be fantastic. The lifestyle, the city, the infrastructure, the women, because I'm non-monogamous, it's all gonna be wonderful. I can't wait for this stuff. And I wasn't excited at all about Paraguay. I figured Paraguay would be a little crap hole little country that I could just kind of check off the list because it was on my list of places to visit. And I'd be like, all right, I probably won't like Paraguay at all. I'll just look around and say, okay, this is boring and gross and stupid. This is lame. I'll hate it. And I'll never go there again. But at least I've checked the box in terms of going there. And then later when I go to Argentina, I can focus on all places. Well, when I went down there and I spent a week in Buenos Aires and a week in Asunción, Paraguay, it was the exact opposite. I didn't dislike Buenos Aires. I didn't dislike Argentina, but I didn't like it. I wrote a big, long article at my blog at the time, years ago when I went down there, about all the chaos I experienced at that airport. It was awful. One of the worst airports I've ever been. It was just nonstop problem after problem after problem after problem after problem with the infrastructure down there. The infrastructure was pretty horrible. There are a lot of things about Buenos Aires I didn't like. There are some things I loved about Buenos Aires. It's a really fun place to visit, but I would never want to live there. This is what I used to say about Los Angeles before it started collapsing a few years ago. Historically, throughout the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, what I would say about LA is I love to go to LA, love to visit LA, fun place to visit. I would never live there, Jesus Christ. And so that's my opinion of Buenos Aires once I left Buenos Aires. And then I had the exact opposite experience when I went to Paraguay. Went to Paraguay, I completely and totally fell in love with Paraguay. I had no idea I would feel that way. Matter of fact, when I first landed in Paraguay and got to the airport and was driving around, I'm like, oh, I don't know about this place. Once I got settled in Paraguay, got out, talked to some business owners, went around the countryside, talked to some people, some of which did not speak English, most of them did not speak English, had a little fun with some of the women down there. Oh my goodness, I loved Paraguay. And I was shocked that I loved Paraguay. And when I came back from that trip, it was a complete 180 for me. I didn't give a shit about Buenos Aires anymore, and I fell in love with Paraguay. And so Buenos Aires, in terms of Argentina, was crossed off my list in terms of places to move to, and Paraguay was added to that list. I would have never thought I would ever live in Paraguay until I went there. By the way, I had a very similar experience the very first time I went to both Tokyo and Shanghai, Japan, many years before that. I visited both those cities in the same trip. I spent a week in one city and a week in another city. And I figured I would completely fall in love with Tokyo, Japan. I figured I'd be so excited and I would never want to leave. I was really pumped to go to Tokyo, Japan. I couldn't wait to go. And I said, well, while I'm there, I'll go to Shanghai and just check it out. I probably won't like it very much, but again, I can check it off the list because that's a major city I wanted to visit. Exact same experience in terms of Buenos Aires and Paraguay. First, I visited Shanghai and I loved it. I love Shanghai. Shanghai now rivals Hong Kong as probably one of my favorite cities in the world. Again, I can't go there. It's kind of sad, but Shanghai is amazing, especially the Pudong district right there with the new buildings and the high rises and the water. I love Shanghai. I miss it when I'm not there. It was fantastic. I was so amazed at the infrastructure there. the organization there, the fact that those subways are amazingly perfect, the technology there, it was just wonderful. And the people there were great. They were really enjoyable. Some people can't handle the Chinese. Some Westerners are kind of pussies, and they go, well, the Chinese are very coarse. I love the Chinese. I think they're fantastic, fantastic people. Had a great, great time. Then my week was up, and I said, okay, cool. Now I'm going to Tokyo. This will be great. I'll love Tokyo even more than I like Shanghai. And I went to Tokyo, and I spent a week in Tokyo, and it was fine. It was fine. I liked it. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. As a matter of fact, I remember feeling this way. This is many years. This is well over a decade now. I remember after 3 or 4 days in Tokyo, I had a week planned in Tokyo. I went, I'm ready to leave. I want to go back to Shanghai. I remember thinking this. I'm like, I've been here 3 days. I got to spend another 4 days here? Okay, it's fine. It was fine. The women were very pretty, and there's some neat things to see in Tokyo, but I didn't love Tokyo like I loved Shanghai. And I would have never known that had I not gone there. So I guess the lesson here in this podcast is to not make assumptions about what you think Asia is, what you think the Latin world is, until you actually go there. And I'm going to repeat this again. If you are an American, you are more likely to make stupid, incorrect assumptions about other countries. Americans are the worst people in the world in terms of the Western world about making assumptions of other countries. I've noticed the Europeans, Australians are a little less bad at this. The Canadians are pretty bad too, not quite as bad as Americans, but the Americans are the worst. They'll say, well, I don't want to go to Buenos Aires because of blank. And it's some bullshit thing that doesn't even exist because Americans think they know everything and they fucking don't. So if you're an American, do not assume. Do not assume. Do not assume. Go there. Spend a week there. See if you like it or not. If you don't like it, you haven't wasted your time because now you know you don't like it. You can cross it off your list. You also have to determine what your priorities are. And this is a very important point. I've mentioned this on my other content. Why are you leaving the country? Or should I say, why are you choosing the country you want to move to? What is the most important aspect of that new country? Some of you are moving for economic reasons. That's why I moved out of the United States. Some of you are moving for lifestyle reasons. Great, or weather, things like that. Some of you guys are single and are moving for woman or sexual reasons. Okay, fine. Some of you are moving for tax reasons. What is the primary aspect of that new country you need to fulfill? I moved to Dubai because my primary reason for moving was to save money on taxes. That's reason number one. Reason number two was having a good economic hub and a good travel hub. None of my reasons for moving to Dubai were sexual. None. And I've told guys, if your big goal is to date a bunch of girls, and you make $22,000 a year, you don't want to move to Dubai. This would be the worst place in the world for you to go. You want to go to Thailand, Philippines, okay, Colombia. You want to go there. You don't want to come to Dubai. Man, that's my point. What's your primary objective in terms of where you want to move? Is it economic? Is it business? Is it taxes? Is it lifestyle? Is it weather? Is it women? What is that? Determine that first, and then use that as a guide to where you want to go. And the beauty of both Asia and Latin America is there are countries in Asia and Latin America that fall into all of those categories. There are good countries for economics. There are good countries for dating. There are good countries for lifestyle, both in Latin America and Asia. Being aware of weather differences. Asia is going to be a little hotter and more humid than Latin America, although many parts of Latin America can get very hot and very humid. So just be aware of those things. I hope this has been of help to you. If you want me to go into more detail about how to determine what country you want or determine the region you want, let me know. And I have a lot of information on this stuff. I could talk about this stuff all day. I will see you in the next podcast next week. Have fun. Bye.